Welcome to the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy Podcast, where host and lacrosse expert Jamie Monroe will do what he does best, talk about lacrosse. Each episode will provide listeners with education, insights, stories, and lessons about the lacrosse world. We will discuss current events, coaching, philosophies, and college lacrosse recruiting. Now let's get started with your host, Jamie Monroe.
I want to welcome Joe Keegan from Money Ball Lacrosse onto the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy Podcast. Joe, welcome aboard. I've really been impressed with your work over the last number of years, and getting to know you has been great. You're a true expert in the game and as big of a lacrosse nerd as I would consider myself being, and I love talking to you about lacrosse, so welcome on board.
Appreciate you having me, Jamie.
Awesome, man. So let's let people kind of know a little bit about you. For those of you guys that are listening in, if you have not checked out moneyballlacrosse.com, it's truly one of the best sites out there for taking this combination of subjective and objective looks at the game. And so give us a little bit of a rundown on how you came up with this and how it all works and your role and all that.
Yeah, so it probably started so I went to high school in Massachusetts, played in high school, didn't play in college. I went to Boston College, but I wanted to find ways to stay involved in the game. I interned with the Boston Cannons, and one of my roles with the Cannons was to write the post-game press release. And I would write the post-game press release, and there was really not much to talk about other than the box score. I would aggregate, all the news articles about the Cannons throughout the week. And they were all kind of saying the same thing. Matt Posque had 3 goals. Paul Rabel had, a goal and 2 assists. And every site there were 4 or 5 sites covering the games, but all kind of saying the same things. And I wanted to bring a new voice to the conversation. So I was looking at a lot of what was going on in basketball. I think basketball over the last few years has just had a huge growth in, the number of different conversations that are happening. Sure, there are dunks that go viral, or, the video clips play really well on social media, but there's also really good conversations going on related to like the value of a corner 3 or, a mid-range jumper being one of the least efficient shots. How do you get more shots at the rim and more threes? And I guess basketball knew what types of shots they wanted to get, and they were working towards that. Like Money Ball was starting. What I wanted to do was take a look at what's happening in lacrosse and see, what are some of the shots that we take too much of, or what are the shots that aren't being taken enough? Where are the inefficiencies that we can cut and the efficiencies that we can try to expand on.
So cool.
The Phi-Lacrosse-ophy Podcast is brought to you by JM3 Sports. Go to www.jm3video.com to get more information on the JM3 video assessment tool.
So cool. Last week I spoke with Mike Mobison, who's an analytics guru in really his day job is investment strategy and his hobby is lacrosse. And I know your day job is different than your hobby too. And I love the fact that everybody is willing to put so much time into the sport. And really you're helping drive it forward. When we think about, this balance between subjectivity and objectivity, it's really interesting to me too, because, with JM3 Sports, this new company I've started, I'm working so much with film. And I've started to look at film of players, film of games, film of practices. And I've also been looking at, the actual analytics behind it. And I know that's a huge part of moneyballlacrosse.com. I went on there today and went through every single one of your pieces that are on that homepage. And so much of it has really nice analysis, but it also follows it up with really cool stats. And so I just wanted, to let you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I think the in terms of stats and video, I think the two go hand in hand. You can take the stats and try to come to conclusions, or at times the stats can, provide you with more questions than answers.
Yeah, so true.
You find a stat, that is trending upward or trending downward, a recent trend. And, my first thought isn't to write it off as some like end all be all conclusion. It's, hey, let's take a look at the film of, these particular shots. Like if it's Paul Rabel shooting when he's dodging from the wing as opposed to when he's dodging from up top, let's take a look at his dodges from the wing, his dodges from the top. Let's see why there's a difference in the two. Let's see how defenses are defending him from those spots, whether, starting at one area of the field prevents him from getting his strong hand to the middle of the field. Let's take a look at the trends. So I think the stats and the video really go hand in hand.
No doubt, because the stats tell you a story of what worked and what didn't, and it's pretty cut and dry, right? I mean, and then when you look at that, then you can look at the video, and then you can start to analyze and say, well, why did it work this time, and why did it not work that time? What was different about the situation? Was it slightly how the defense played you? Was it the technique that you used? Was the goalie guessing? And all of a sudden you start to be able to put together all of these pieces that can help you, make whatever scenario that you're looking at, you can analyze it. You can figure out if you can make it better or not. But the stats do tell you some really interesting things. And you were talking about, you did the color for the Lizards Rattlers game just last week, right? And
yeah, Sunday night.
Sort of bunch of homework on that. Talk to us a little bit about that game and some of the conclusions that you came to, particularly as it relates to Rob Pannell, and then any of the other stuff, because there's some really great information out there, particularly on the Rattlers.
Yeah, so as far as Rob Pannell goes, one of the stats that I dug up for that game was how does he shoot in the pick and roll versus how does he shoot in the dodge? Obviously, he's a guy who's capable of creating his own shot for himself. His question mark is, he didn't invent it, but he perfected it. And he's much better at getting to that island in isolation situations than he is off the dodge. Off the pick and roll. Off the pick and roll, he's shooting 7%. Off isolation, he's shooting 38%. So prior to that game, I sat down and watched a bunch of his pick and rolls. And, there's a couple of things that's happening. The Lizards' pick location isn't great. It's at that kind of no man's land at X behind the cage where the defense can get under and switch and get back on that matchup in time. They can switch it or they can get under. And if they switch, then they often have time to flush out the mismatch. So even though they're big littles and there might be a short stick on Rob Pannell for a split second, the number one defender, in this case on Sunday night, it was Matt Dunn, was getting back on that matchup in a hurry. So it was having trouble producing him shots. And when it did produce him shots, I think it bounced him a little wider than he's used to going when he's in isolation. So in the grand scheme of things, at a macro level, shots that are taken off of those two-man games are better shots. They have higher shooting percentages, but that might not be the case for every single player. So I think, stats can bring out maybe not so much like a PER metric, like in basketball where you try to rank players from top to bottom, like 1 through 100, but they can highlight the nuances in someone's game. What's Rob Pannell strong at? What's Jordan Wolf strong at? Jordan Wolf's a very good pick and roll player. Pannell, more of an isolation guy.
So interesting. And that's where you look at the stats and you're like, wow, he's shooting 7% on his dodges out of the two-man game. And what was his shooting percentage off isolation?
38% off isolation. Yeah, which is that's a healthy number if you're shooting off the catch,
That's like a massive, massive difference. So yeah. Now you look at that and now you say, okay, let's look at the video. The pick location. So, it's not his fault if basically, the pick isn't being set in a place where it's harder to get under it, for example. If it's set right at X, it's pretty easy to cut through the crease. If it's kind of ball side of X, it's a lot harder. It's similar to like a razor pick. They really run into a question of, they have to run in a very not straight line to get there. Obviously maybe he could, I think you mentioned that, hey, sometimes, maybe he's got to like dodge away from the pick, as we named it last year, shortcut the pick, and just like, if the pick is set up for your left hand sweep across X, maybe you just cut to your right, kind of like the way the Stanwicks were so great at doing that over the years. And, so there's a lot of analysis that goes into it with it as well as the stats, but the stats don't lie, and the stats need to be looked at, and it's just fascinating stuff. So now let's talk, you did mention on a macro level what it's like, in two-man game offense versus isolation. What are those stats?
Yeah, so I dug this up, the shooting percentage, and basically to give you the brief overview, we track every shot that's taken in a settle situation as either a dodge or a two-man game, and it was either initiated on the righty wing, the lefty wing, X, or up top. And over the last few years, we've been tracking these numbers since 2015. If you look at all those situations, so those 8 situations, two-man on the right side, two-man on the left side, two-man X, dodge X, all those, the 2 best actions in Major League Lacrosse have been two-man games on the righty wing, two-man games on the lefty wing. Two-mans on the righty wing is 33.2%. On the lefty wing is 32.7%. The only other actions that are above, 30% are two-mans at X, the dodges on the lefty wing, and two-man up top. Dodges at X, dodges at top, those are the 2 worst actions, and they're the 2 most common actions. So I guess there's a little part of that, that those are the shots that are being taken the most. But we do have, over those few years, a pretty big sample size that suggests that the 2 most rare actions, the two-man game on the righty wing and two-man game on the lefty wing, really box pairs concepts. The numbers suggest that those are the best actions, not just the shooters on those side too, but any shot that's really generated by those actions, they're yielding the best shooting percentages.
So you're measuring also, let's just say on the lefty wing, there's a two-man game and they're able to like swing it and make one more. Is that those 2 passes later count as generated from that action?
Yeah. So it's the action that really gets the defense moving. If there's a slide and the defense hasn't recovered, then that's still the action that started that shot, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think that's more valuable than knowing like what the guy who was standing there 2 passes away waiting for the ball was doing.
Okay, so summarizing this, you've got lefty and righty two-man action on the wings at 32 and 33%.
Yep.
You've got plus 30% on two-man from X. And by the way, this two-man stuff, we're talking about big, little, most of the time, right? So
most of the time, yeah.
You're not going to do big and have the same success, right? And then it's still a 30% yield on two-man out top.
Yep. So yeah, two-man up top is still one of the top actions.
And then as a dodging one-on-one action, by far the worst is dodging one-on-one from out top. Second worst is from behind. And then the wings are still really good, and they're in the 30s.
Yeah, correct. Dodging up tops, it's 25.8%, and it's by far the most common action. It's the easiest way to get your shot off. But a lot of those, when you think about it, if you're starting your dodge from up top center, you're either going to get to your left hand with your stick to the outside or your right hand with your stick to the outside. Neither's a great option because you can't attack from up top and then get a shot off with your stick to the middle. It's just really tough. You got to go to the high wing, the low wing. You're not going to beat your man in that direction unless you drive the alley and get a roll back, but that's what the defense plays,
So when you look at that dodging from out top, it's not just from top center, it's alley dodges as well, right? You're counting those in. And I noticed, I think there was something like 4,000 dodges. What are the actual numbers?
Yeah. So over 3 years, 4,200 shots from up top.
So that's alley dodges primarily.
Yeah, alley dodges. 2,700 dodges from X. And then there's nothing else where there's been 1,000 shots. So those make up, the biggest piece of the pie. Dodges from up top, dodges from X, which makes sense. Dodges from up top is probably where the short sticks are. If you only have one pole up top, even if you have two, you're going to have a midfielder who can attack. And dodges from X is probably where your best player is. So you want to initiate from there a lot.
Yeah, no doubt. Really, really interesting. And looking at the Rattlers, I mean, I got a chance to see firsthand last year as a defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Blaze to try to figure out how to play two-man games defensively. Obviously, we all, know well the options are of either, switching, getting through it, getting under it, or doubling it. The hard part about it is that it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all that you want in all situations, and that's where the gray area comes into being. Behind the net, you'd kind of rather be able to get underneath.
Stay on your matchup. But then above the cage, you can't give any breathing room.
Yeah, and you'd rather not, you'd always out top, you're kind of like, well, let's just switch it if we have to. But then all of a sudden when the picks are really wide, it's like, why would we bother? We can get underneath this thing so easily. And then you get Lyle Thompson sort of playing with you right on the 2-point line there on his wing. And you're like, you really want to get underneath this thing. But at a certain point in time, you take a quick look over your shoulder and then he shortcuts that pick and gets right to the net on you or whatever. So it's really hard. And I will say that one thing I learned from coaching at that level was the ability for the short sticks to process and communicate was so massively important that it was by far the most, in my opinion, the most important thing. Like covering somebody, was, there was some version of importance there, no question, but being able to process in the two-man game, to be able to recognize and process it and communicate what you wanted to do was just so critically important. Now let's talk about the Rochester Rattlers and some of what they do.
Yeah, so the Rattlers obviously rely heavily on their guy at X like the Lizards do, but Jordan Wolf brings a bit of a different style. He's a heavy pick and roll guy, especially now that a guy that we were talking about earlier, Jordan McIntosh, is back. McIntosh is probably the best picker in the league. So when you have Wolf and McIntosh running those actions, it's really difficult because your rules are important, but if you give, if you're off of Wolf for a second, he's going to get free for a shot. And if you let McIntosh slip through the cracks, there's nobody better at rolling to the net, catching and finishing. I actually ran the numbers because we were talking about it today. Who scores as a picker in those situations? Over those 3 years, McIntosh has led the league in assisted pick and roll goals by far. There's not really anyone else close. The other guys who are like in the conversation would be Kieran McCardle. I think he played a lot. Kind of some two-man games at X with Casey Powell in his first year. And then Davey Emila has had a good amount of success playing that role. But
as far as being the receiver on the pick and roll for goals?
Yeah, exactly. But we were talking about it. There's not a lot of players in the league who are used to playing that style. I think indoor guys are kind of phased out of the league just because they're not available early in the year. And those are the guys who are the savviest pickers. They play with their heads up. They're not just a body you're throwing at a defender to create some space. They're going to pick, they're going to slip, they're going to get open, they're going to find space. I think, more guys like that, the more that you can incorporate into your offense is going to bring out the best in a guy like Jordan Wolf. Who's to say that Rob Pannell wouldn't be playing the same style as Wolf does if he had a guy like McIntosh? I think Pannell's teammates just aren't as used to playing that style. So it's an interesting little case study juxtaposing Wolf and Pannell. But those actions, those Rattlers actions, they've been shooting 50% off any action, any two-man game from X, which is better than most teams' man-ups. It's
unbelievable.
Ridiculous.
And I can tell you this too, like when we played Rochester, we just, you can't keep up with Jordan Wolf. He's just too fast. And so we basically defensively played it where we just we didn't even go behind the net with our picker. We left our picker in front and we just basically turned it into a Coma slide. And and, hoped you threw it back to X and then we could like rotate and make somebody else do something with it. Because if you get stuck back there, it's over. He's fast. It's like absurd. Now, and you shot me over a couple things that said we were talking about a second ago is, this 2-man action versus 2 poles or big little or 2 shorties.
2 shorties, yeah.
22.7% is the shooting percentage off of 2 poles, 2-man games. 30.4% in the big little, and 35.7 in the 2 shorties. That, I always kind of knew this, but I didn't know it to that degree. That's like it's pretty awesome, and it's. Are you a little
surprised by that? Because with 2 shorties, you would think your rules are a little simpler than big little. You shouldn't be worried about fighting through.
You know why I'm not? Because this is where Jordan McIntosh, I bet you if you look at him, he does mostly short stuff. And because that's what I was going to say, like it's usually not him and Wolf on the wing. It's usually him and a shorty. And basically what he does is he baits his man into – because what do you do when it's short? You switch. And he baits his man into switching, and then he just cuts to the net with his right hand right in front of him on that wing. And they just throw it in there, and it's a goal. And it's like, damn it, we knew it was coming. We literally but – Those guys are good at feeding it, and he's so good at setting his man up to think he has to switch, and then he's out of there, and he catches everything, and he carries everything.
He does.
It's to defend that, you just have to have the comfort that you're gonna it's almost like playing an invert where you're gonna set up a slider who's gonna go on the roll. And you either stay on the double but you just know you're sending somebody. But they do a good job of clearing out the middle. That's another thing that happens in the MLL. There's just not a crease a lot of the time. It's not like there's a crease guy that you can just count on being in there. In college, in high school, there's more crease guys. In the pros, they really kind of just drift. Everybody, doesn't want to be on the crease, I think. So they just turn it into 2 on one side, 4 on the other. And then all of a sudden and the thing is you got Jordan Wolf behind. So you just don't want to have anything to do with showing off Jordan Wolf on the, whereas most X guys, you might say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna occupy that space right in front of the pipe, so that when you try to go, when Jordan McIntosh is handling this ball, you're going to be there. But you just don't want to do that with Wolf behind. You have to cover him back there. He's just too explosive. So it's possible that Wolf really does give, that 2-man wing on that side a massive advantage because of the way you have to respect his ability to catch and just blow by you.
Yeah, absolutely. You see a lot of teams that, you don't see it often in the pros, but they'll just make it really tough for Wolf to catch the ball. I remember the championship against Denver. They really took him out of the game in the second half, making it difficult for him to get it. Kind of like what we saw with Jeff Teat down the stretch this spring.
Yeah. And it's the other thing is just, maybe just pack it in on him so much that you just hope that, you're not going to at least get run by. We're back to
the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy Podcast is brought to you by JM3 Sports. Go to www.jm3video.com to get more information on the JM3 video assessment tool.
We're back to the alley shot concept. I coached last year for Dave Huntley, and the late, great Dave Huntley, one of the best guys ever, incredibly smart guy, loved analytics. He actually brought Jesse McNulty into the program last year. And Jesse, he's another lacrosse analytics guy. He kind of got his start in hockey and somehow fell in love with lacrosse. And he's been doing a ton of work on MLL stats. And they looked at, I forget how many shots, but I think it might have been like 12 or 14,000 shots over the course of several years. Talk to us a little bit about what you know of, as it relates to that alley shot, sticks to the inside versus stick to the outside.
Yeah. So Hans and Jesse they presented at LaxCon 2 years ago, and their finding was that your shooting percentage skyrockets when you're in the same position on the field, but your stick is towards the middle of the field. So you call that your natural side. If you're a righty, your stick's to that inside, it really increases your shooting percentage. I think in the middle of the field, the differences are not as noticeable, once you're between those hash marks. But if you're if you're at the hashes and your stick's to the outside, it just decreases your angle so much. It's a huge concept in box, obviously, because the goalies have more padding, the nets are smaller, so every little bit of your angle helps. In field, you can get away with having your stick to the outside. I think we're taught a little bit to play with our stick to the outside because it's stick protection. You don't want your stick towards your defender. But when you can get those shots, a lot of them are step down looks on the backside, when you have your stick to the middle. But we're seeing more and more in this, especially in this league. And like I talked about with those two actions, 2-man games on the lefty wing, 2-man games on the righty wing, a lot of times start with guys on their natural side. You're rarely going to see, maybe in like a pass down, pick down situation, you'll see a righty pick for a lefty. But a lot of times those guys are starting on their natural side where they're significantly more dangerous. It boosts like 2 or 3% to your shooting percentage to have your stick to the inside.
Yeah, I notice on Jesse's stats, it's in every single position on the field with the exception of dead center, where it's hard to have your stick if you're dead center, your stick's to the outside no matter what. So there's nothing you can do about it, I guess. Unless you do your typical Canadian shot with your hands straight over your head. But
Miles Thompson behind the back.
Yeah, backbreaker. It's funny because it does seem counterintuitive, like, the idea of stick to the outside and you think about stick protection. But, the thing is that, think about attackmen when they're coming. Think about the lefty attackman. Can he go left and right and still get his left? Yes. Right. So this is like what, this is what's so funny. I do these, all these JM3 video assessments of players. And honestly, like the first thing that most people need to figure out is like, you would be so much more productive if you just got down to low wings. I mean, it's just a fact. Your stats are backing it up. And when you look at it, it's just so obvious. But, the lefty attackman, it's like, he's all left. And well, he gets underneath him. He still scores at lefty. But he did go to his right. Or he comes topside and gets his left. Or he comes topside and he bounces out and gets a new angle and shoots it. And he's still coming to the middle. And this is why I believe that in teaching players how to play, you teach them how to play on their natural side. And believe it or not, it is so natural for players on their natural side. They will catch it and face dodge and come back to their right. They'll catch and hitch and go and get their strong hand. They'll face dodge and roll back to the middle. And it's intuitive, more so than you would think. Whereas, what's also not intuitive is being able to carry to your weak hand to get to where you want to get to. And that's why so many middies just settle for their strong hand alley dodge. And, you reference box lacrosse. Box lacrosse is a sport where it's a 4x4 net. If you don't get to the middle, you'll never score. So growing up, I have a contention that I don't care who you are. If you could be never have coached before, you could be the greatest coach ever, the worst coach ever. If you were to take a group of youth kids, you're going to develop them faster in the box environment than the field environment, just because the environment in and of itself, the touches and the small net and getting to the middle and all of that stuff. But back to the sticks to the middle thing, it's fascinating. And Hunts used to talk about it all the time. And another guy who talks about it is Nick Myers. And he really changed his way he plays and just said, look, we don't want alley shots. We got to do everything come into the middle. And it doesn't mean, you could go watch Ohio State film. There's going to be a few alley shots, but really, it's more of a big picture concept, but it's really, really fascinating stuff.
Right. And Ohio State, when you have guys like Trey LeClaire and Eric Pannell, one on either wing and they're attacking, like you said, if Trey LeClaire is initiating from that righty wing, he can go topside to his right, or he can go underneath to his right. And he's so big and so strong that he can go underneath and end up putting his stick back to the middle and get a quality shot. Especially in the pros where that crease dive is an option. There's nowhere as a defender to push the guy. You can't push him topside. You can't push him underneath because they're both good shots. Where if you're dodging from up top, you can push them either side. Sure, go either, take this alley or take that alley. Neither's a great look. Out of those four looks, right?
We need to bring back the dive.
Yeah, I agree. If we're that could be a whole nother podcast, but
that's a good one. I played for Dom Stars at Brown. Dom went to Virginia, and he had the ultimate divers and Doug Knight, Michael Watson, and Whiteley, and these guys. And then all of a sudden, he's on the rules committee, and he goes to the meetings, and he comes out, and then there's no more dive. I'm like, Dom, you got to be kidding me! No more dive. I guess his kids graduated. I don't know what the deal is, but man, the dive is such a great play. So I like to give Dom a hard time about that. But hey, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a small sample size because we don't see a ton of zone in the pros, but people always bring up zone being the one thing, like the biggest reason against the shot clock in college, saying that every team's just going to play zone. But then the counter is, okay, put in a 2-point arc and a shot clock, because then teams won't play zone because the 2-point arc. I think even more so than the 2-point arc, I'm not a fan of the 2-point line in college. But I am a fan of the crease dive and the shot clock being implemented at the same time, because if you look at the few teams who did play zone last year, it was mostly the Lizards for stretches. A lot of teams will do it with low time on the shot clock on an end line restart. Like the Bayhawks put it in at the end of the year. But if you look at the goals that were scored against zones, a lot of them were crease dives, because It's really tough to hold goal line extended against somebody at X, depending on what your zone principles are, like what,
Well, Lizards in particular played with a 2 short sticks down low, the old Tony Seaman.
Exactly. Yeah. They're not going to pressure
anymore, but that's how they played it. And I can totally see your ability to just like dive right around. And it's such a great play. It's got to come back. But hey, back to the one more comment that I've never talked to you about before that's super interesting though, is that I believe, and I don't have the stats to back it up, but maybe you can put this on your list, but I think that you create more offense when you dump the ball to X with your stick to the inside than with your stick to the outside. I think that when you get underneath hard and have your stick to the inside and you're able to deliver a pass to X with your stick to the inside, that it causes the defense to collapse, to slide to you longer and collapse farther than when you put your stick to the outside and draw attention and bang it to X with your stick to the outside. I've always noticed this. I actually don't have proof, but it's like you watch Denver. They're incredible at throwing the ball to X, and yet when the Canadians do it with their sticks to the inside, it's almost always a goal. Remember Zach Miller being able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
He was a great player anyways, but he would dodge on the wrong side, and there's nothing wrong with dodging on the wrong side and throwing it to X with your strong hand. And there's nothing wrong with you got a pole on you and you're going to have to throw it to X with your weak hand. I mean, it happens, but if you can beat a guy underneath badly enough that you can deliver a pass to X with your stick to the middle, I think it brings up a better chance for the next pass. What do you think about that?
That's interesting. Yeah, I'd like to look at that. Now I'm just picturing, slides to alley dodges. And I guess when you slide to an action like that, it's easier for the original on-ball guy to peel off and start the recovery, I guess. Is that what you're saying? That if you're, dodging hard with your stick to the middle,
so on a wing dodge, just think you're lefty and you're on the wing. If you split to your right hand and it looks, you don't have a whole lot of angle, they're not as worried about the shot. They may be sliding, but they're not like when you deliver the ball, they can see it coming and you almost veer off to make that pass sometimes as opposed to like leaning in. And you could lean in and kick it that way too. But when you're going underneath, if you're a lefty and you're going underneath, and let's say you hold it with one hand like Zach Miller would, you're getting under and now you're bringing your stick back to a shooting posture, they have to keep coming to you. And it basically makes the slide longer.
Right.
Which makes the recovery and then it makes the ensuing collapse happen more drastically. So maybe you can put that one on your list and check it out. I think it's a super interesting concept. I mentioned it to Mike Mobison and he was like, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting also. But we'll have to take a look at that. Now, you guys do on Money Ball Lacrosse, I really enjoyed it's box lacrosse season up in Canada right now. Actually, I was watching the Junior Adenauks get a big win last night over the Salmon Bellies, which they needed. They tied the series up 2-2. My son plays for the Adenauks. So I watching a fair amount of box lacrosse today, and I went through all of your moneyball.lacrosse.com, all the write-ups on the indoor stuff, and also this week I did a really cool game breakdown with Paul Day of a Peterborough Lakers and a Brooklyn Redmond game, and we were talking about nations looks. Tell us about how you kind of took what the NBA does in the way they look at two-man game and the way you applied it to the NLL, and then talk about, nations looks, two-man, all that type of stuff, and share some of those thoughts, because it's super interesting.
Yeah, so in the indoor game, we tracked sets a little bit differently than we did in field. Field, we're really focused on like offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency. I think that's what drove us to get to where we wanted to go. Indoor, we really just wanted to look at shots, and there's so many of them, such a big sample size, and we really wanted to look at not just the action that initiated the shot, like we were talking about earlier. If Dylan Malloy dodges from the left wing, draws a slide, makes a pass, makes another pass, and then Connor Busick gets a step-down shot, that's still marked down as the initiations to the dodge from the left wing. In the indoor game, the shooter himself was tagged with his role, whether he was the pick-and-roll ball handler, whether he was the roll man, an off-ball cutter, a spot-up guy, an off-ball screener. So the shooter and the passer each had a role. So what we were able to do was take all of the shots taken by pick-and-roll rollmen and that were fed by players other than the pick-and-roll ball handler. So essentially, like you said, the nation's concept, the two-pass pick-and-roll. So we know that it wasn't just your ordinary pick-and-roll ball handler throws it to the roll man and he takes a shot. So the nation's concept, we dug up the numbers. I got them right here. Okay. When fed by the pick-and-roll operator, rollmen shot 13.5%. When they were fed by anyone else on the floor, so pick-and-roll ball handler throws it across a box back to the rollman, is 25.8%. So almost double. Wow. From 13.5 to 25.8. Obviously, it's a tougher look to find, but I think especially in the box game where they're so physical with the picks, it might be different in field. I'd be interested in seeing it because they don't, double team and rough up the ball handler as aggressively in field just because there's so much space. But for those looks, to like come to fruition, I think using that third party, that passer who kind of has his head up, he's probably in a better position to make a pass, an accurate pass than the actual pick and roll ball handler. And it really gets the defense moving. It gets those two guys out of position, and you'd say you're playing a temporary 4-on-3, right? If they double team the pick and he's able to get it off to somebody and the roll man's going free, it's just a guy streaking in the middle of the floor. So I thought it was really interesting to see those looks. Nobody did it better than the Saskatchewan Rush. And I know Coach Day is a big proponent of them. I actually talked to him before.
Oh, you did?
Before that article, yeah.
Yeah, he was talking a lot about it. It's so cool. And so for all the listeners out there, the two-pass pick and roll, when you think about a pick and roll, you think about, that someone sets a pick, you dodge off of it, you draw the switch, and you feed the roll man. And so you're saying that's 13.5%. And whereas if we throw it across the floor to somebody else and they feed that roll man, it's 25.8%. I mean, that's just an unbelievable stat. And so you say, now you look at the stats, now you got to go look at the video and say why. That's why it's so important to be able to look at video and look at stats. And so, I mean, there's so many reasons. I know that when my son was playing intermediate lacrosse, there was a guy named Pete Tellis, who's a great lacrosse mind. And he coaches, I think he's coaching, might be coaching Burnaby seniors. He coached Coquitlam seniors. He coached the Coquitlam intermediates. He was really, really good lacrosse guy. And he literally wouldn't let his team feed a pick and roll. He wouldn't let them feed it. You always had to throw it away from the pick and let them feed it if you're going to feed it at all. And the idea is that, a good defense is just basically putting up a wall in a zone. They're designating a slider, zoning things up the same way you do in field lacrosse, and you can rotate to it. And that's, for a lot of reasons, that's why that's why this works so well. But also because you can't really guard both sides of the floor at the same time and double team and help on it. So all of a sudden you've got, people helping in, ready to rotate to the pass on the pick and roll. But then so say the lefty is running a pick and roll. There's a defender ready to rotate. If you zip it over to the righties, now they have to go play it. And now you can feed that. And that by nature of your positioning on your pick, you have a step to the goal on your man. So it's fascinating. I will say that for coaches on this call, and I mentioned this when I was with Coach Day, there might be no better way to teach lacrosse to young players from a skill and an IQ perspective than to teach nations looks with your two-man game, because it teaches everybody how to do the things that you need to do, which is attack the middle with your dodge, move the ball really fast, the feeder being able to identify the open man before he gets it, the picker cutting to the net, the initial dodger looking for his give and go, because that's there all the time as well. There's all different angles on it. And it's funny, I coached at Mountain Vista High School. We did that around 4 years ago. We just worked on it ad nauseum. I'm not a big play guy, so I'm not sure. We probably didn't run it in games very often, if at all. We probably should have. It was probably stupid not to. But, man, our players learn how to move the ball and get their heads up. So it's really cool, the nation's look. Let me ask you, let's talk about why it doesn't happen in field lacrosse as much. What are some of your thoughts on that?
I was actually going to ask you that, if it's a product of 6 players on the field versus 5 in the box, just it's maybe easier to flood the ball side and make that pass to the weak side more difficult with 6 defenders than it is with 5, because obviously you draw a slide in the field game, it's not as easy to find that 2-on-1, find the open guy, find the advantage as it might be in the box where there's fewer players. I don't know if that's a factor in it.
Well, I think because you can designate sliders a little bit more easily, it's harder to roll to the net anyway.
Yeah.
Although the same argument of, hey, if you swung it to the other side, why couldn't you feed it? And you probably can. Obviously, the long poles factor in. I think picking and slipping to the perimeter and getting shots off and throwing back to that slip is really effective in field lacrosse, because you can shoot from more range and from the wings more easily than you can in box, where you really got to kind of go to the net. So I think that's part of it. But where I see it happen a lot, and it doesn't get classified necessarily as a nation's look, but you and I talked about it a little bit, but if let's just say you're in some kind of a pairs offense and you dodge a hard righty alley, and or any offense where you've got a crease where they're going to slide off the crease, and you throw it to X, and then you throw it to that crease guy who might go to a follow spot. He might cut to the ball, but when I kind of call it mirror nations there, because it's kind of the same idea. I mean, as opposed to picking where you're bringing your slide and your switch to the ball, you're just positioning your man in a way that if he slides, you're open. And instead of throwing the ball to that guy, throw it to X and let him feed that guy. I call it reverse it to the follow, is what I would classify that as. But it's a pretty cool little look that you see. Denver does a ton of that. Duke will do that. Who were you talking about? Maryland was getting that look a lot. I forget. We talked about this, right? What was that? I can't remember what it was. It was some piece that you did in the playoffs. It might have been Cornell, actually. No, it was Cornell with T. T would set picks and they'd throw it to X and reverse it right to him. And it was a nation's look, but that pick and throwing it to X and reversing it to him is no different than if your man just slides. So I think that's where you see that nation's concept a little bit more in field lacrosse. But I don't think that many people work on it, that much. And I think that, like I said, developmentally, it's as good as it gets, because everybody has to get the ball out of their stick fast and play smart and move the ball. It's really interesting. Hey, let's talk a little bit about assisted goals versus unassisted goals, and some of the stats that go along with that, and then some of the things that maybe are the myths and truths. Like not everybody is better at what you think they'd be better at.
Yeah, so this is like one of the main things that I wanted to start tracking, because like I talked about when I was interning for the Cannons, writing up the post-game, press release, how do you compare Matt Poske's hat trick to Paul Rabel's hat trick? You know, like, did Paul Rabel shoot in 3 for 7 all off the dodge? Was that like should he have been player of the game as compared to Poske, who shot 3 for 4 all off the catch? Like, how do you compare those shots? Which is the easier look? What is the value of having a guy who can create his own shot? Because if you have no shot creators on your team, you're never going to draw a slide, and your finishers aren't going to get open. So, like, what's that balance? What's the recipe to find, like, your optimal 6 guys that you want to put on the field? So we started tracking every shot as either off the dodge or off the catch. Who was the passer? Was there a passer on that shot? So, again, like picks at a macro level, they're good. A pass is good for your shooting percentage. It's going to boost your shooting percentage by a few percent. An unassisted shot over the last few years, it's changed every year, but it's usually somewhere like 26, 27%, where an assisted shot can be as high as 32% across the league.
So it's pretty significant.
Pretty significant, yeah. You got to factor in like the hidden cost of making that pass. You know, like you're at a higher risk for a turnover when you make a pass than when you're just shooting off the dodge. So it's not like it's that much more of an efficient play, but it's that much more efficient of a shot.
Yeah.
So when you look at those, there are some players who obviously only take assisted shots, some players who only take unassisted shots. Not every player is better at catch and shoot looks like you would think. Some players are better off the dodge, like a ball dominant guy like Ned Crotty, Mike Janicuk. Those guys are much better off the dodge. Jordan Wolf's maybe not necessarily poor off the catch, but he just doesn't get a lot of those shots. You never see him taking those. So I think it's really interesting to look at the different types of makeups of certain offenses. Like if you look at Ohio, their championship run last year, and that offense they had together for a long time. Cockerton was kind of an off-ball guy, but he has a dodging game. And you could say the same for Holman. Holman's probably the best off-ball player in the league, and he also has a decent dodging game. All those players might have been ball dominant in college, but they all meshed because they can excel in both situations. So they're not invisible when they're off the ball. I think it's a big reason why you're seeing the Lizards offense being more successful after they brought in Will Manny. A lot of people's reaction was, okay, another big name, another guy that I know. People think that he's a quarterback because he was in college, but you got to credit him for really changing his game and becoming an off-ball player in the pros. He still has a dodging game when they need it, but he's been able to play. He's the perfect guy that they needed alongside Rob Pannell and Paul Rabel. You can't compliment Pannell and Rabel with, Lyle Thompson on one side and Josh Byrne on the other.
Right.
It's going to be tough because all those guys take, 80, 90% of their shots off the dodge. So what are they doing off ball?
You need that balance. And that's why we were talking earlier about, Mike Mobison's stats on Canadians and how, since 2012, Canadians are shooting at a 34% clip and Americans are shooting at a 28% clip. And, the truth is the Canadians tend to play a role where they're just taking shots off the catch. They're not necessarily having to dodge as often. I mean, it's not to say none of them. I mean, certainly Chris Cloutier is getting to the goal pretty well, but in a lot of his games where he gets 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 goals, there's a bunch of goals that are off the catch there.
Right. A lot of those, guys like Westberg and Trey LeClaire certainly have a dodging game.
Right.
Maybe a guy like Mark Matthews is more off ball. I'd say probably overall, obviously we don't have the numbers on it, but they probably are taking better shots, but they also know how to get better shots because like we talked about that box concept of having your stick to the middle.
That's right.
And starting on your natural side and attacking the middle. When they are shooting off the dodge, they're probably starting from a better area and keeping their stick to the middle. How often do you see, maybe UNC is the team that comes to mind where you have Canadian midfielders who might shoot down the alley, but even a guy like Tanner Cook, he's getting his left hand back to the middle of the field when he's driving the alley.
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, he dodges the occasional lefty alley, as you mentioned. But, yeah, no question. It'll be interesting to see a stat on on the effectiveness of shooting and finishing with twisters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Certainly,
Anything
sometimes
like
that gets your stick back to the middle for one, but a lot of times they shoot their twister when they're on their natural side and they're faking a reach, and then they twister back to the near side. And oh man, this kid, it's pretty funny. You watch the Coquitlam Adirondacks, and they've got Chase Scanlon on the team, and he was on the Canadian national team. I mean, the Iroquois national team, and you've got like it's over the years, it's like who's who, and then you've got this kid Denon Armstrong that isn't is like great player, doesn't really feel like going to college. He's had a million people off for him, and he shot the most nasty twister you've ever seen on power play last night. It was just it was almost cruel how good of a shot it was. But that's a shot that I think would be really interesting in statting and sort of seeing like, all right, just changing, basically it's like a curveball kind of. I mean, it gives you a whole new angle, and if you're in tight to the goal, it allows you to throw it around the goalie as if you were switching hands. And if you're farther from the goal, it allows you to throw what's almost seems like a curveball. So you can throw it back to the same, back against the grain, and it gives the illusion that you're going, so if you're a lefty, it may look like you're twisting it to the right pipe, but you're actually throwing it back to the left pipe. And those shots are unbelievably effective. And it would be really cool if there were stats on that.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one to chart. I don't know if we've seen it, but you're right. Yeah, next year. They're like it reminds me of like a toe drag in hockey. Like the goalie squares up the puck, and then all of a sudden you move it, and it completely changes the goalie's angle, and he doesn't have time to readjust himself.
That's a huge point in box too, the way that these guys like basically backpedal and create new angles. And it's one of the reasons why they lift their sticks up straight over their head, because it gives them more near side angle, and they can still curve it to the far side. It's really interesting. One of the things that I showed you before we got on the call here officially, I showed you the stats that I do for my video assessments, and we've talked a lot about the combination of analytics and video. But when you think about our sport in lacrosse, to me it just seems like the world really hasn't understood the value of video and analytics like it has been, the way it's being valued in other sports. I mean, think about golf. Would you ever, get serious about golf and not use video to analyze your swing? Yet people are spending so much time and money on lacrosse and literally never getting an expert analysis and much less metrics on their play. What are your thoughts about that as it relates to players getting better and coaches trying to get better?
Yeah, it's crucial to your development. There are so many, I think lacrosse, it's said often, but there are so many different ways to play it. You don't have to be the biggest, strongest, fastest. You can be a guy like a Jordan Wolf or Jeff Teat, who in Jordan Wolf's case uses his speed, straight line speed. Jeff Teat is kind of slippery as a dodger. Kevin Rice is a big footwork guy. All of these guys have different elements to their game that you can incorporate. It's not like you can just watch one player. If you're picking up a lacrosse stick, watch one guy and say, okay, yeah, I watched Kyle Harrison film. Now I know lacrosse. Now I know how to play lacrosse. Because you might play like Kyle Harrison, which isn't a bad thing, but you could be maybe, you just don't have Kyle Harrison's skill set. Maybe you're like a big, slow-footed guy, and like, why are you watching Kyle Harrison split dodges? Because you're never going to shake anyone out of their shoes. You got to watch somebody who's tailored for you, like somebody who dodges and uses their body. Like watch Dylan Malloy play,
Yeah, exactly. The common denominator between Wolf and Teat and Rice is, if you were running a lacrosse camp and they were working, this happened to me with Michael Watson. I was like, hey, what's up, buddy? I thought he was a camper at first. Because they're not like huge guys. But, but this is like, it's kind of funny, but those guys, all three of those guys are really smart, and they know how to play to their strengths. And so, in college lacrosse, talking to Nick Myers, talking to, all of the guys that I've done these interviews with, they're either already just crushing their video work on an individual basis with their players and using analytics, or they've made a decision they're going to do that. And I guess my newfound love is watching video and looking and seeing how you can help players be better, and by looking at advanced stats, and by looking from a quantitative perspective, and then looking at exactly what they're doing and how you can make it better. I mean, it's pretty simple to just say, hey, get to the low wing. But you know what? That might be the difference in shooting 30% versus 15%, which is, might be 20 goals over a season. So it's a big difference. It's a really big difference. But Joe, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy Podcast. This has been super interesting. I really love your work at moneyball-lacrosse.com, and I recommend anybody that's into lacrosse, check it out, and I really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch down the line.
Yeah, of course. We'll be in touch. Appreciate you having me on. This was fun.
Cool.
The Phi-Lacrosse-ophy Podcast is brought to you by JM3 Sports. Go to www.jm3video.com to get more information on the JM3 video assessment tool.